Hey, how's it going? Dylan here. Today we're going to be discussing 5 pieces of gear that can instantly improve your photography. Number 1 is the tripod. Don't underestimate the power of a tripod. It can be so useful in a variety of different scenarios, especially if you need to shoot at a slower shutter speed in order to achieve a different look for your image, or if you just need to let more light into your camera. It's also really helpful if you need consistency in your photos. Say if you're doing family portrait shots at a wedding and you want them all to be framed up pretty much the same way, that's a really good time to use a tripod. It's really helpful if you're shooting landscape and nature work, if you're doing macro photography of any sort. It's just really helpful in a variety of different scenarios, so don't underestimate the tripod. It can be extremely helpful and it really can improve the sharpness of your photos. Next up at number 2, we have filters. Filters are extremely useful to add that little extra pop and punch to your image to make it look more professional. Now there are a lot of different filters out there, but 2 of the most common ones that can really help you out would be an ND filter and a circular polarizer filter. Now what's an ND filter? This is basically like sunglasses for your camera lens. It helps reduce the amount of light that comes into your camera to hit your sensor. So this is really great if you're doing video work. It's also really helpful, say you're shooting waterfalls and you need to limit that amount of light that's coming in so you can do a slower shutter speed. Really helpful, really useful. Highly recommend ND filters. Next up, circular polarizer. Now you may be saying, what does that thing do? And this can do a variety of different things as well. One of my favorite uses for this filter is to cut out some of the harsh reflections and the glare when you're shooting waterfalls and all that water spilling on the rocks and the sun hits it and you get those harsh reflections. This cuts it out pretty much completely, and that's extremely helpful to make your images look more professional. It also can enhance and enrichen the blues in your skies if you're shooting landscapes or any other kind of work where you need that extra pop. All you gotta do is literally twist this thing and get the amount and the degree of effect that you want to your image, and they really work wonders. So I highly recommend you get a circular polarizer if you're doing any kind of landscape, nature work. It's also helpful for video as well. Can't really go wrong with this filter in your camera bag. If you want to have some fun and get creative with your shots, I recommend an infrared filter. These are extremely fun to play with and to see the effects they have on your image. It's really nice for black and white imagery. It really sets your images apart from a lot of others, has a very distinct look, so I recommend trying one of these out and seeing how you like it. It's also great for color images, but you usually see it for black and whites, and that's where it really pops. If you want to learn more about filters, let me know in the comments below, and I'd love to make a video really going in depth on all the different kinds of filters and what they can do to your images. Next up is your speedlight and your trigger, and this comes in handy in a lot of different scenarios. Don't get stuck using your on-camera flash if you have one that usually doesn't look the best. I highly recommend investing in a speedlight. These are really useful for portraits, weddings, macro photography, you name it. They come in handy in a lot of different situations. And if you get a trigger for your speedlight, you can take it off your camera to get really creative with your lighting. And you may be asking, why do you have a Canon speedlight with some Godox trigger and all that gear? Well, that's because I use the 80-200 Pros a lot when I shoot weddings, and sometimes even for portraits. They're really portable, really great speed lights. If you want to check them out, I'll put a link in the description below. But definitely invest in a speed light and trigger, because lighting is everything, and once you start playing with that and getting creative, it's honestly really addicting and you'll have a ton of fun with it. So I highly recommend you invest in lighting, and you will be glad you did. Next up is fast lenses, and you may be saying, what does that even mean for a lens to be fast? Can it run away from me? No, that's not what it means. It means it has a very wide aperture, and by having a wide aperture, you're able to let in a lot more light into your camera, into your sensor, and that's really great if you're shooting in any low light scenarios. But it's also great because it gives you a very shallow depth of field, and that's when you have a lot of blur in your foreground and background, and you get a lot of that bokeh in your image, and that's the amount that's blurred in your background. And this is really compelling for portraits, macro photography, anything really. Everyone loves some good bokeh to their images, and so having a fast lens lets you shoot in low light situations and still be able to capture some very high quality images without a lot of grain and noise to your image. But it also gives you that really nice soft blur in your foreground and background, and that's again really compelling for a lot of different situations. One thing to note is that fast lenses usually are quite expensive. Now there are a few prime options out there that are fast and they're not too expensive, but in my personal opinion, I think it's totally worth investing a lot of money in some quality glass. They define the look of your image, they have high resale value if you're upgrading or switching platforms, and they just really boost the quality of your photos a lot. And I really believe that investing in some nice quality lenses is one of the best investments that you can make in your photography gear. And finally, you need the right lens for the right job. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, every lens has a different look. You're not going to take your 16 to 35 wide angle lens that shows the whole environment to shoot a close-up of a bug when you're trying to do macro photography. Likewise, you're not going to take your macro lens and try to shoot this wide landscape because this has too much compression. It's zoomed in too much into your scene. You're not going to be able to capture that whole broad landscape. So every lens has this different look to it, and you need to pick the lens that you need for the right job. Now that's up to you to decide what you need depending on the work you do. If you're doing portraits, there's lots of great lenses out there, anywhere from a 50, 85, 135. Those are all great portrait lenses. Landscapes, you can do a 16, 24, 35. Those are great. Shooting sports, you want to get a long length lens like a 200, 300, 400, etc. Those are all really great for sports and wildlife too. So those are the 5 pieces of gear that I believe will instantly improve your photography if you learn how to use them and you use them well. If you enjoyed this video and if it was really helpful to you, I'd appreciate it if you drop me a like. That really helps the channel out, and be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell to get notified when I drop a new video, because we got lots of great content coming and I'm excited to have you along for the journey. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.